So you received a negative review on Etsy and, well, you're a little upset and you're thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? Because people are going to see it. New people that are coming into my shop, they're going to go, oh my gosh, this shop, I'm not buying from them. They got this nasty review, or this review that said that, their products weren't delivered on time, or the product wasn't what I thought it was going to be. What do you do about that? So Chris, I know that we have talked about this because we've had a story or two, but Marmalade just posted something and made me realize that we should probably bring it up and share their article, but then dig in a little bit deeper. So can you pull that up, Chris?
From our friends over at Marmalade.
Cool. Well, they're our friends. We don't know if they're our friends. We haven't really formally introduced ourselves to them, but I like them. I like their product. I don't use their product. I'll be totally transparent, but we can say that we're friends because we're kind of publishing on the same content. So Marmalade, if you are watching this, how you doing? Nice to meet you.
Would you say, Scott, Marmalade, Marmalade, just to be real French about it, or Marmalade?
I don't know, actually. I really don't know. Do you know for sure?
I've always heard Marmalade, and I've never actually paid attention to it until just now, right? Where I'm looking at it, I would say Marmalade, right? But that's just me.
Yeah.
And I don't tend to get very, French about things. But I am channeling early 2000s pop music here, thinking about Little Lady Marmalade. But what we're talking about is getting a bad review on Etsy. Now what? And this is something, whether it's going to happen at the very first one that you get is always going to be a trigger for people. Once you've gotten 100 of these, you kind of care a whole lot less because you're like, nothing I can do about it. But the first one, especially if it's like your first or second review, can feel like it's the end. And I think the photo they chose for the cover here is absolutely perfect.
It's on point.
Right?
Yeah.
And everybody in the comments is letting us know that it's Marmalade, right? Leeed. So we'll go with that, like capturing marketing leads. And they're saying, no news is good news, as the old adage goes. But what happens when you get bad news on Etsy? What is the process that you should be going through? And Scott, I know you had an experience with this recently, and I'm curious how your wife handled it as we start to work our way.
Well, yeah. And before I share that, there is something I'll share with you guys, and something that you all should do if you get a negative review. It's like a must, but I'll kind of walk you through what happened. But what I would like you to do, Chris, is scroll down a little bit in the article and find the part where Etsy, what it says about certain things that won't stay as a negative review. So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see something in their terms of service, I believe. Keep going. It's a screenshot. I remember seeing it right there. Okay. So basically Etsy has stringent rules. One, contain private information. So if there's private information that's in the review, they won't use it. Okay. Two, contain graphic, mature, or obscene language or imagery. Okay. That type of stuff. Contain hateful type of message, contain prohibited medical drug claims, contain advertising or spam, be about things outside the seller's control. And this is the one I really wanted to highlight here. Number 6, if for some reason you have an issue with the shipping, the carrier, okay, it's not technically your fault. So because of that, technically, Etsy should not keep that as a negative review. Now, whether that happens or not, we can't say, okay? For the most part, I do believe that they remove them, okay? You may have to contact seller support, and on that, you probably will get someone to look at it, and you probably will get that removed. So that's one thing. If it's related to shipping, you want to make sure that is addressed, okay? Obviously, number 7 contains threats or harassment or things like that. So basically, it's like if someone is going to be rude and obnoxious, they're not going to allow that to be in there. Okay. Now, let me share the story. So recently, my wife had someone that complained that the product didn't arrive. Okay. And now they did not leave a review yet. Okay. Yet. What they did is they said, listen, it hadn't been received. I haven't received it. It should have been here. And it hasn't been. So I was hoping you can send me another one, and I was hoping I could change the color. So that right away was kind of a red flag. because we're like, wait a minute here. This person seems like they wanted a different color, but they don't want to pay for it. And they're just going to pretend like they didn't receive it. That's kind of what my hunch was. I don't like to think people are like that, but I'm like, why would you want to change the order after that? So the great thing about using a postal service of some kind, you can track. And usually nowadays, they're taking pictures of the package on the porch or wherever, right? Sure enough, package was delivered. Okay. So there's proof that it was delivered. So my wife goes back to her and says, well, I reached out to the shipping company. I looked into it and it does say that it's been received. Now I'm not accusing you. Maybe it got misplaced to another location and they assumed it was yours, whatever. But I'd be more than happy to send you out another sweatshirt. Okay. Didn't say we're going to change the color or anything because that wasn't the original deal. That person left a negative review and said basically that they ordered, it didn't come in time, and that they wanted a refund. Now, this is what I would recommend doing, and this is big. Someone leaves that review. Now, this has to do with shipping. That should be removed automatically. But in the meantime, while it's still up there, the thing that you should do is you should address it. And you should now comment on that review as the seller and basically saying like, hey, Sally, I did reach out to you. We did notice that it was a shipping error. We immediately shipped you out a new item. I'm sorry that you still feel as though this was a bad experience for you and that you gave us a 1 star. So basically addressing it. Now, if someone reads that review, is that going to negatively affect our shop? No, most likely not, because we've all seen those. We're like, okay, this person's being a little, just a little extreme. Okay. But at least it shows your customers or your potential customers that you're addressing it and that you're on top of it. Now, most likely that is going to get removed. But this lady, it kind of seems like trying to pull a fast one. All right. And we weren't going to let her get away with it. All right. Because we're not just going to send you out another item for free of a different color because you changed your mind on the color. But that's for another story. All right. But that's how we would address it. Chris, what else are they saying in that article that we should probably address?
Yeah, and I think the process here is what's really important. The first thing is you got to take the emotion out of it, right? It's really easy to get a negative review and go, ah! Or to even go through the process, Scott, that your wife went through, which is like, well, I looked at the stupid shipping thing and it says that it was delivered, right? And then you immediately go comment on the review. That's actually kind of your last thing that you want to do. The very first thing you want to do is take a step back, take a breath, right? See if it violates policies. That would be step number 1. And then number 2 would be to reach out privately. Go into the messaging function within Etsy and try to reach out privately before you respond publicly. Because once you respond publicly, it limits the ability for Etsy to remove that review. Why that is, even if it violates their policy, no one actually knows, right? But it's just a weird quirk of the Etsy ecosystem. So that public response really should be the last resort. And Scott, that is really where they get to in the article, which is like, look, do everything you can to respond privately and then respond publicly. If you've tried to solve this, which is exactly what your wife just did, and it just doesn't work, then follow up and say, look, we shipped it, it was delivered, or it was marked as delivered by USPS or whoever. We sent you another one. I'm sorry that you had a bad experience. Yeah. Obviously with a little bit less tone than I have right now, but you're typing, so it won't come through anyway, right? If you want to be a little snarky and said, hey, we messaged you a bunch of times, you didn't respond to us. However you want to handle it, you can handle it publicly. But I would say that would be the last resort. So see if it violates policy, respond privately, and then when you have to escalate it, respond publicly. And here's the deal. There's a phrase or a concept in the legal world, Scott, and you may have heard this. When you have a witness who maybe isn't the greatest person on the planet, but they're a key witness for your case, you, as the lawyer, have to bring up the parts of their personality or the parts of their story that are not as appealing before the other side does. It's called drawing the sting, right? So you're taking the wind out of the sails of the prosecutor who's going to come back and go, oh, well, he's just a drunk or whatever, right? You say, sir, do you have a problem with alcohol? Right? It's called drawing the sting. And what we do when we publicly respond to a review after we've gone through that is we draw the sting out of that review by saying we actually care. The only power that a negative review has is if you as a seller don't care enough to address or show other customers that you have addressed the issue. And that public response being the last way that you do that, listing out all of the other ways that you've tried to help that person, draws the sting out of that negative review for anybody who, like I do occasionally, Scott, and I'm sure you do this, right? You just sort by 1-star reviews just to see the funny things that people are saying. Even if you're one of those people and you're doing it seriously, when you see that the seller cares enough to respond, it makes most people go, okay, this person is just a little out there, right? Maybe they didn't have as bad of an experience as they think they did. Maybe they're just a Karen, right? Or maybe they just like to complain. And I know that if I have a problem, they're at least going to try to take care of it. Maybe they won't be able to successfully resolve it, but you're able to draw the sting. You're able to draw all of the power out of that negative review with that public response. But again, we want to leave that as the absolute last resort, because once we do that, it limits the ability for Etsy to take action on that. So we want to keep those things in mind. Scott, the 8 things that we were talking about in sharing that earlier, which was, does it contain any private information? Does it contain any obscene, racist, or harassing language? Does it violate the anti-discrimination policy? Which I find it kind of amusing that they have those two things split up, because I would think anything that's obscene, racist, or harassing would also violate Etsy's anti-discrimination policy. Is it advertising or spam? Are they shilling for somebody else, right? Or does it contain something that's outside of the seller's control, like shipping? And what you will find in most cases is that it falls kind of into that shipping category because people don't like the wait time, or they had a missed delivery. And I know this was a big deal last year in the UK, where the UK Postal Service had a lot of long delivery times because they were I believe they were on strike. Right, they had a lot of issues getting stuff delivered on time. And if you ship it on time, you can't be responsible for what happens in transit. And Etsy acknowledges that. So if we go through that process, we take a minute, we take a step back, we then try to address it privately. If we can't address it privately and it doesn't violate Etsy's policy, we can't get them to remove it, then we address it publicly. We draw the sting out and show future customers that we're willing to address any issues as reasonably as we possibly can.
Yeah, and the only thing I do want to make sure that we're clear on, and someone had brought it up in the comments, is that should be a last resort to, like, my wife replied on that comment after we saw it was not removed. Okay, so just because it's about shipping, it doesn't mean that it will be removed. It should be, but doesn't mean that it will be. So that should be a last resort. So that way there, like Chris just said, you can kind of remove some of that sting, that if you didn't add context to it, it would make it more effective as a negative review versus it being like, oh, there was an issue, the seller tried to make it right, but the customer is still not happy. Right. So at least it shows a little bit of the dialogue, but that will not be removed once you do comment on that review. So make sure that it's your last resort to do that. So this way here, you can make sure that it's going to be there forever. You're going to know it, but you can make sure that it's the right decision at that time.